Joining us as we talk about navigating death, grief, and loss in tumultuous times. And this is definitely a tumultuous time right now that we're
for sure.
experiencing. And Diane is a guide, educator, and navigator of life and its many seasons. She's also an ordained interfaith minister and designs and officiates sacred ceremony and ritual for any season. She's passionate about philanthropic and holistic endeavors and inspires us to claim our dreams and to experience our authentic selves by living fully through all life's passages. Her specialty is guiding individuals and families through the season of death with a passionate commitment to help change the paradigm of our death-phobic culture and our current end-of-life practices and offerings. Diane has been educating, supporting, and providing inspiration for the past 30 years, teaching from her own life studies and experiences and from her own incredible adventures in living. And from my experience of you, Diane, your wisdom in all of these areas is so beautiful and powerful and empowering. And what's coming up, jumping up for me right in this moment is, how did you come to do this work? And what is it that you mean by a death-phobic culture? I feel like I understand, but for everyone out there, tell me more about that.
Well, you don't really realize you're a death-phobic culture until you need to know about death because it's now come into your life. I'll tell you one thing, it was the last thing I ever thought I'd be doing. I had a long bucket list of things, but working with the dying and doing that was not in it. I was a party planner, an event planner, and also at the same time a spiritual student for about 20 years at that time. And I was going about my life and got the phone call that my mom and dad were it ended up their last 3.5 years of life. And I was primary caregiver for them and long distance because they live in Florida. But being self-employed, I was able to be more flexible. So my father was under hospice care for 17 months in a hospital bed in the living room with just my mother in the country on 5 acres of land. And he became very ill with congestive heart failure. And I got the call that they wanted me to come down and help. And when I got there, it was a lot worse than I expected. And so I got them on hospice, and 17 months later, my dad made his transition. And I knew nothing about how to help somebody through that. So we were just going by the seat of our pants and just trying our best. And he wouldn't talk about the things we needed to talk about to help us prepare. But I had a completely different experience with my mother. And she died 16 months after my father. And I brought her here to Louisville and had the most amazing experience of my life, helping my mother transition in the living room of my home. And it was all intuitive and in the moment planned. She and I were definitely partners in life, and we were equally effective of partners in her death. And we'll go into more about what I experienced, but I came out of that knowing that we were a death-phobic culture. We have a hard time talking about it. We're ill prepared for it, however it comes into our lives, whether it's ourselves or someone else. And we know very little of our options. And so literally a few days after my mother passed, I actually kept her body at home, did a home funeral, and did not involve a funeral home. So that was an amazing experience. But I literally was walking down the street on Bardstown Road with my boyfriend at the time and my sister and her husband chatting. And a calling came in and said, teach people what we just did and organize something. And that's where it started. And I've been doing it ever since. That was about 16 years ago.
Wow, that's beautiful, Diane. Beautiful.
Yeah, it really was. It changed my life. It was probably the most difficult thing I've ever been through. And at the same time, it was the most life expanding and most beautiful thing I've ever been through. And what better gift could a mother give their child than to give them their life's purpose? And also to not be afraid of death. I mean, what a wonderful gift. She showed me there was nothing to be afraid of. It's actually quite a beautiful and natural experience at the end of our lives. And when I was with my mom, my sister on the other side of the bed, and she was in the last, minutes of her passing, I looked at my sister and I said, intuitively, I feel like I'm a midwife helping our mother birth somewhere else. And that was the feeling, and that was the experience that I had, and continue to be amazed by how beautiful death can be at the end of life if we change our perspective. That it's really quite an amazing experience and process. And everybody gets to do it,
Yes, absolutely. And I've witnessed this so many times about how this phobia of death that we have, of death and of grieving and of actually feeling our emotions, is so prevalent in Western society. And many years ago, people actually did grieve, like they openly grieved.
Absolutely.
And there was like throwing themselves on the casket or the body, or just like wailing or whatever, like literally using every part of themselves to express their grief and their loss and all of this. And it's like they intuitively knew that it had to move through them.
Yes.
And now we see this shamed. I mean, if somebody actually is just even openly crying at a funeral, you get comments like, well, she's not handling it very well. She should be sedated. They should do the kind thing and give her some antidepressant, or, some sedation.
Yeah.
And you see this over and over and over again.
Yes, for sure.
And so, yes, your statement that this is the death-phobic culture is so real.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing about that, not only we were more expressive about our feelings and expected, and many cultures actually have practices to help you go through that in a very conscious, concentrated way. We also used to be hands-on with our dying. So when somebody in the family died, the family gathered together. Sometimes even the dying person would help build the casket or the coffin out of wood, and they would decorate it and do things, and then hands-on, and then they would handle the body in the home. And so what you get from that is this beautiful completion with somebody that you've known your whole life. If it's a family member like that, you've known your whole life, and you get to be fully present with them through all the stages. You don't just get up to the end and go, oh, no more, hand it over to some professionals. So that fear gets instilled because we don't see death. It's other cultures, there's death all around. Cultures that have been through war, or in countries where they're cremating bodies on the river, where they're washing their clothes and those things, their death is all around them. People who grow up on farms may have a better expression or experience of death with animals and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I really believe what happened is we got so removed from nature with industrialization, and we talk about we have to go out to be a part of, to go out and be in nature. Well, we are nature right here, and we forget that we're part of that. And getting separated from that, and then the industrialization. After my mother died, everything was natural. I had her direct cremated, so her body was not embalmed. And then, of course, I had that beautiful time with her. Well, I've lost my thought. Get me back. Thinking of my mom sometimes does that.
Yeah. So you had her directly cremated, and
yes. So I went to a funeral a few days after, and there was the body embalmed in the casket. And I remember walking in and saying, how did we ever get to this from there? It was really, so I researched it. And it actually happened because what I experienced was so much more lovely and compassionate and easier on us, the family, because we could do our own thing in our home and take the time we needed and so forth. And so I researched and found out that the embalming and so forth started during the Civil War, when there were soldiers that needed to be brought home so that the family could give them a proper home burial. And so embalming was brought over to this country, and then embalming shacks were set up on the battlefield, and they would embalm right there and then send the bodies home. Well, it was a great thing for the moment and a good purpose, and it turned into a multi-million-dollar industry, and took the care of our dying out of our homes and turning it over to the institutions and the professionals. It's may look easier that way because that's what we've become accustomed to, and we think it is the way, but it's really a way that it's taking away a lot of opportunity for so many things. One, to face death and to face the fear and see there's nothing to fear, but also to do this beautiful completion with your family. There's so much opportunity for healing if you consciously enter the death chamber from a different perspective. And the more the family that can get involved, and not only the family, I was here without family. My family, the small family I have, is in Florida. So I had to circle around friends, people who thought like I did, and were helped me set up this beautiful sanctuary in my mother's, in my home for my mother. And I even had a minister say, when I was bringing my mother home to die, because she was in a nursing home in rehab and it took a turn, she said, "Do you realize what you're getting into?" And I said, "No, but you can't talk me out of it. I'm bringing her home, and we'll just have to work that out." And so, yeah, by the grace of God and just being in the present moment, and seeing what's needed and get still and ask for direction. It's the way to, you'll find that you know what you want and you know what needs to be done in the right way. And as long as you don't let that chatter override. And how I got to have that experience with my mother is that if I had something that I wanted, or I didn't like what was going on, or I wanted something done differently, my intuition was strong. I asked, and if they told me no, I'd ask again. And because we're pushing boundaries of a system that's deeply in place, and they don't like it when we ask them to do things outside the box, like, can I keep my mother at home for 26 hours is what I ended up doing. May I come and view the cremation process? Well, they were like, "Oh my God, we've never had anybody ask that. I don't even know if it's legal." Things like that. And usually it was legal. It's just nobody had ever asked. So we know. So if you never even get any further than this, trust yourself when you're going through that process. Be in the present moment and be quiet and silent as much as you can to get direction from your, from your inside, and just go for the love. And one of the best things that I can say to carry through any of this is as much gratitude as possible. Gratitude for the process, gratitude for the person in your life, grateful that you get to do this process with them, however it is. It doesn't matter if it's sudden or if you get to go through a long illness like I did with my father. All of them have pluses and minuses, and neither of them are right or wrong.
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
It's just the way life goes. How's our technology doing? I said, I can do death really well, but technology, I don't know. It may be the death of me.
The technology is working well.
Yeah, it is doing well, and it will not be the death of me. I say
no, it won't.
Yeah. Actually, my intention was to eventually take my work online, and I was actually going to ease into it, but I didn't know, that I was going to be thrown into boot camp. So here we are.
And here we are, and what you were feeling is actually what's really, really necessary right now. So that brings up like what's going on right now, where people aren't even allowed to gather, and so often, I mean, we already have dysfunctional culture around death and dying, and now we have this situation where people can't even they can't even gather and mourn the death and express their loss and express their appreciation or celebrate.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that came up as you were talking, we think death is supposed to be a certain way for it to be okay with us. But around the world, people all the time don't get to say goodbye to their loved ones. They get killed in the war, they get lost, their bodies get lost somewhere. It's impossible because of travel or whatever. So we've always had the challenge with that. It's much more intense now it's particularly in our culture. My motto is, if you want it to happen, there's always a way. So to not buy into this is the way it is and there's nothing you can do. I have never really liked that answer about things I know can be different. And so one of the most important things to do is get your facts ask a lot of questions, find out what's going on. And there's always seems to be a way to be there for a loved one in creative ways. It's endless. Like right now, I'm offering to go online and coach people through this. That's something new, not
Yes, it is.
we've had before. And also, I was an event planner for 20 something years before I went into this work. And so I'm really, really good at creating life celebrations. And so there's all kinds of ways to do that. Like I just helped a friend pass away. She was in her 90s and very, very close to me. And I'll maybe share some more about that. But the way that I've been being with her, and I'm looking over this way right now, is because I've got a beautiful altar in my living room for her. I started it when she went into hospice care. And I started with a picture and a candle, and then a flower added in. And then it just kept growing. And then as she went through her process, this beautiful altar is just so lovely to be with. And it's my way to celebrate her when I can't go to a celebration with other people. And I can see those kind of things can be done online and in Zoom calls, or there's all kinds of ways to do it. And as far as when someone is, you're dealing with someone who's now in the dying process and we're in this situation, you just have to very carefully navigate navigate what's going on. Be present. I think being present is the most important thing, and getting the facts, asking questions, asking for help. Reach out to other people. You think about in the institutions, the hospitals, the nursing homes, they are so busy and they have a system that is just like this. And if you come in and disturb it, they're not all that happy about it. So it's very good to make friends with those people, the staff and the nurses and so forth, and the doctors, and see that you really care. And they tend to want to get involved more as well and help you find some solutions. Did you disappear for a reason?
I'm here.
Okay, the screen went black.
No, I'm here. So what do you feel is like the most challenging thing in navigating this as someone goes through the process of death, assisting them?
I think one of the hardest things is to get people to talk about it. It's so easy to not want to talk about it because it's so hard to face. And we're not used.
Are you referring to the family or to the person, or both?
I'd say everyone, but in the case of my father, he wasn't all that interested in talking about the things we needed. But I have found most of the time that the person dying desperately wants to talk. They want someone to like deal with them straight and ask them, how is it for you? What are you afraid? Are you afraid? Are you ready to die, or do you want to live? You know, finding out those questions. I find that most people in their dying process really want someone to talk to them directly. And what tends to happen is everybody does, they're either in denial or the family's on different pages about what should be done. And so it's confusing about what's going on. But when I was dealing with my mother, I was very present with her. And as long as I knew she had a chance to live and she wanted to, I always brought her in her choice to empower her. Do you still want to? Do you want to get a second opinion? Do you want a second kidney transplant? And my mother could clearly say no. Well, what happens is she gets to direct her end of life. And I don't feel guilty because I've covered all the bases and helped direct her to where she wants. And so as long as I knew we were going for living, I did everything to help her live fully in her life. And then when it was clear that she is going a different direction, she's going to die now, that's a different direction. And then I support that. I don't force the eating. Once they decide they don't want to eat anymore, I don't force that anymore. Intuitively, they know what to do. The body is set up for the dying process, just like we see in nature with animals. When an animal gets ready to die, its natural tendency is to stop eating and drinking and to go out into the woods and return to the earth. And another animal might get them because they're vulnerable. Thank God we don't have to deal with that at this time. But it's the same for us because we're made out of the same. We're nature. And so trying to force feed complicates the process. The body's trying to go in this direction, and then and that's one of the things with conventional medicine. It's like we try to keep people alive at all costs. And that's not always what's best for the person who's passing. And, you know, hospice is a good support in that. They actually have a policy about when a family's ready to stop feeding and giving liquid, because it is interfering with the process. So.
Yeah, so something that's coming up for me, because I've witnessed this in the past, is when family is completely in denial and they don't want to face the fact that their loved one is dying, especially if it's a young person with cancer or whatever,
right?
Then what I see is then that person, the one who is dying, and this could be with older people too, but they want to not make their loved ones uncomfortable. They want to be brave. They want to hold on. And then it ends up creating a very, very painful struggle where nobody's talking about it. Everybody's in denial. And then the end finally comes regardless of their desire. And sometimes the person has a desperate will to live and a desire to live, but the body just won't.
Yep.
What do you feel is best in that situation?
Take a day at a time.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of hard to give a straightforward answer to that. Each case is individual. You know, you do your best to point out what's going on. I think it's really good if the nurses or the professionals can tell you what's going on with the body, that we're starting to fight the body and so forth. But again, people, I know what really helps. Whatever the feelings are in the family members that are keeping them from facing it. Now I'm talking about, I'm all for going for the miracle. I'm all for giving it all you've got, because none of us want to give up life easily.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't, you know, people say so blatantly sometimes, you know, or flippantly, that's the word. You know, if I get to that point, just shoot me. Well, it just doesn't work like that, because most of us, we hang on to life because we love life. And we don't, you know, we don't want to let go of it. Now, my experience of this whole process is there is nothing but life, and we just change forms. That used to be a belief for me, but after doing death work for 16 years and having some amazing experiences and very tangible experiences, I know that something goes on in that expression, and it's very real. You know, getting back to if there's one in the family who gets it and understands it and can dialogue with the person dying, many times that's helpful. Like I was a guide coming in saying those kind of things to the people I've assisted, because I'm not afraid of it. So I just straight out ask. I mean, I'm not brazen about it, but I look in their eyes and say, so how are you doing? And where do you want to go with this? And you know, those kind of questions. Do you want to live, or are you ready to let go? You just have to navigate it and finesse it and take every opening that you can. Do you have any thoughts about it? Because I know that you work a great deal with people dealing with trauma and so forth.
One of the big things that comes up for me is that when people have just followed like the status quo, done what they should do, and really never have truly lived life, then it becomes a struggle because they are so afraid to die without ever having truly lived.
Right.
And so that's a big thing that comes up for people. And there's so much fear around death, and people often don't understand why they have this fear of death when they're totally healthy. And we have a culture of people who are, you know, they've numbed out their emotions, and death forces people to feel. And so something that forces you to feel when you're walking around in a state of numbness, and kind of what I refer to as the walking dead, because people are so traumatized and they're afraid to go inside and experience those emotions and do the healing work that's required. So then it creates an even greater fear of death.
Right. And it's not easy to go through those emotions without dealing with death, you know, you know, I mean, I've been on this journey a long time. I thought I would get to a plateau around 50 and I wouldn't have to do this anymore. That's not how it works. We have layers and layers and layers. And what happens too in the family dynamic, there's a dynamic, you know, you got the one that's extroverted and there's one that's the passive, or the one that's the jokester or whatever. You got those players in a family. And when someone dies, all that gets louder.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be overwhelming. But if we could change our perception that this is such a rich opportunity to heal those wounds, because there's usually wounds that are associated with it, some kind of feelings of guilt, regret. I have never worked with anyone in 16 years that didn't say they had regrets about something at the end of life. So there will always be that. But there's so much that you can do to prepare. For example, start doing work like the work that you offer and that I offer with facing your feelings, feel them. That darkness is part of us, and we put up a wall to it. And what we're doing is we're denying half of ourselves. And if we can embrace it and say, okay, come on, I'm not afraid of you. You're part of me. What are you here to teach me? Or what, you know, let me integrate that in. Then you can accept that we make mistakes. We're human. We have those sides. But it's the owning it and then expressing it and doing the grief work. I mean, sometimes I just need to go out into the grass and stomp my feet and yell and do a primal scream, and it helps me move that energy, whatever it is. And then it's lovely to do deep work too, where you understand more about what's going on. Sometimes, you know, emotions just need to be moved.
They do, and that's where the human body is incredibly intelligent, and it stores those traumas and those emotions when we're not ready to deal with them until we are. And so much of this dis-ease that we feel in our bodies in life, and it literally can create physical disease, is because we're not willing to go into, or we haven't been taught how to go into that and to feel it and to process it and to release it, like you're talking about.
Right.
And like we walk people through. It's incredible. The body is incredible. And then when you have this, you add this process of death into the mix of all of that, and then families aren't ready. They're not ready to deal with that. They're not willing to feel their own emotions, let alone talk with the dying person about theirs.
Right.
And so how does one prepare for death? How can they have a different experience?
Well, it's very, death is very complex and multifaceted. So I will start with the basics are, let's start talking about it. I had a class when I first started doing this 16 years ago, break the taboo, let's talk. And so just having the conversation opens up a whole lot. The desire for it to be different. You know, what I observe a lot, and I'm part of this as well, you know, we tend to complain about things that aren't working or we don't like the systems, but it's just so much easier to just keep going with that than to do something new, because it takes extra effort. It's unknown. You don't have all the resources all around you because that's not what society's doing. So, you know, you have to be willing to have that you want it to be different. Right now, when my mom died 16 years ago, when I got into this, there was very little talk about being open about this. It was just starting. And now, 16 years later, you've got death cafes around the community. It's becoming, and death conferences and festivals. We're beginning to shift that, but it takes a long time for a system.
It does. And why do you feel like it's taking so long to shift this in society?
Well, part of it is because we're driven by fear a lot, fear of the unknown. I think that's part of it. And just what I was saying, when there's a system in place this is what we've been doing for, you know, quite a while now, we begin to think, oh, this is the way, this is the only way this is how we're supposed to do it. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the reason it takes a long time is because it's so steeped in that. And also it has become a very commercialized process. Yes. People are making money off of our death.
Yes. And so when something becomes a commercialized process, and then you want something different, you get resistance from the
Absolutely.
system.
Oh yeah. And you asked me how I knew it was a death-phobic culture. When I first started doing this work, when you get a calling, you're pretty obnoxious about it. It's like, I want everybody to have a different, you know, like once I knew there was a different way to do it, I wanted everybody to be able to know that and to reduce the suffering. And, you know, and I would see people and they'd say, what do you do? And I'd tell them that I work with the dying because I didn't know what else to say at that time. And 3 responses, either, oh, I'm sorry that you do that, and there was a backup of energy, or they kind of just went away, or they grabbed a hold of me and said, thank God, I need to talk to you because I'm going through it. Wow. So talking about it, first of all, research, get information. There's groups you can get into. You can take classes with me or do consultations with me where you begin to face and talk about it. First thing you want to take care of is your paperwork. That is that's the basic. Get your nuts and bolts with your will, your living will, your directives. All that legal needs to be taken care of. And it doesn't matter what age you are. Somehow we think that we're supposed to only die when we're older. Well, people have been dying at all ages since the beginning of time, but we react to it that they shouldn't have died at such a young age. We don't know what somebody's soul's journey is or how long they're supposed to be here or what their purpose is, but we make that conclusion. But go ahead and get that basics done, and then go even a little further. Begin to think about, if I die suddenly, how do I want things handled? Not just the paperwork, but how do I want to be celebrated? Where do I want my things to go? How do I want my life to impact the people that loved me? And there's so many creative things that you can do, like making a video to share, at your funeral or at your life celebration. And if you begin to think about, if you die in a longer fashion with an illness or something, how do you want your body taken care of? What's important to you? What are the, begin to claim, this is part of my life and I'm going to plan it at least as much as I would a vacation. We give more energy to taking a vacation than planning our end of life. Why is it so important that we do that? Well, a couple things. I personally think that the more loving and full of gratitude and grace that you let go of your body, it's a better expression for you for your next adventure. But also, your family feels so much better if they know what you want in writing. They don't have to make those tough decisions. I want to die at home if at all possible. No way do I want to die at home. I want to be in a hospital. Some people are more comfortable in a hospital then, but to have that choice and to really begin to think, what kind of surroundings do you want at your time of your death? Do you want music? Are there a particular type of music you like around? What's important to you? And then you begin to take charge of your life all the way through the ending of it. And it's just better for everyone if we do that.
That's beautiful and so powerful. And I saw something that you wrote once.
Okay.
Where you said, the more fully we face death, the more fully and consciously we live.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes.
So everything you just said speaks to that facing of death. Yes. And then we can, more fully and consciously live, because
yes.
we're not living in fear and denial of that end of life.
Well, even though we're not talking about it, we are thinking about it.
Yes.
We have fears, we have concerns. We go, oh no, I don't want to go there because I don't like seeing that. We have all that going on, so we might as well own it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is so powerful. So
I had something else I wanted to say about that.
Good.
I was teaching classes on self-development and personal and spiritual development, going after your dreams. I've been teaching probably for 30 years now. And it was all about living your life fully and authentically, and not letting your fears keep you from your dreams and so forth. Then suddenly I'm jerked into this death work. And I focused totally on that. And then what I realized is, when you deny death, you deny half of your life. And when you have that on your mind all the time, I might die, I don't have it handled, what's happened, it pulls on you. But if you go ahead and take care of it and address it and own it and learn about it, plan it, put it in paper and put it in your file cabinet, get back to living. And so when I started teaching my classes again, I was like, with the backdrop of death as my teacher, I don't want to miss a moment of life. If I own that my life is going to end, that I have a mortality, I don't want to miss a moment of life, because I don't know when that's going to happen. If you own, I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be convenient or if it's going to be tragic. You don't know any of that. But facing it and using that as a motivation to not miss a moment, to care about how you talk to people, going to bed angry, those kind of things. If you think about, if I die today, do I like how I'm leaving things? And then you start to live differently. So it's very powerful for the living, and it's also powerful for when you do make your passing, because it just makes it so much more authentic and true. Really, it's the truth. I mean, I go in to work with somebody who's dying, and for me, like with my friend that I just worked with, I've been friends with her for 30 years professionally, and then we became very close. And then I was a constant visitor and participant in her life these last few years. And when she went into her dying process, for me, it was just like, I'm just going to go hang with her and do what she's doing now. I was just going to go be with my friend and help her through whatever she's doing now. And it was more like just being with my girlfriend and helping her on her next journey, like you would any journey. But when it's death, it's like, oh no, we got to do this differently, you know, or it's scary, it's morbid. We're not supposed to see that. I think part of this, because we've separated from nature, we don't see death. But also the movies and Hollywood and all that have not helped with how scary death is. So
yes, that's true.
There's many reasons that have made us feel that way. And after I have been through this years of, well, I'm going to start by saying I was terrified to help my mother die. I was terrified. I'd never done it before. But as I said, I stayed present in the moment. I kept asking for direction. I asked for help. I would also have really honest conversations with my mother, and she helped me a great deal because she's pretty darn wise, you know. And I remember one time, it was very close to, well, we were told she had 10 days unless she did another transplant, and she did. I got a second opinion for her, and she wanted that, and she decided to go on. And so I was very sad one day next to her bed, and I said, you know, Mom, if I had only moved to Florida to be with you once my father died, I think you would have lived longer, and I feel really awful about that. And she burst out laughing, saying, you don't have any control over that. And that was so wonderful for me to honestly tell my mother my fear, my grief, my guilt, so that she could help clear that for me, that I don't have that power. And I had to do what was right for my life, and she had to do what was right for her life. And it was so wonderful that I didn't have to carry that with me. But even if I hadn't said it to her before she died, I could clean that up after she died by just doing the same work with her in spirit. Going to the altar, sitting quiet and having that conversation and crying and being honest about it. You know, whether you think the loved one hears it or not, and I know that they do because they've given me plenty of evidence, it helps you with your thinking and your psyche to just go ahead and work with it. You can work and heal anything at any time. Yeah,
and to actually heal it, you have to be willing to feel it and express it. Yes. So that's beautiful. Thank you. Could you take us through a journey sample of grief and how we would handle grief in a way that's actually healthy?
Yeah, I sure be glad to do that. So I've always had a tendency to do ritual and ceremony. Even when I was a kid, I always did that. When my animals died, I always did something special and put flowers, and, you know, just, that was always part of me. The best thing I can share with you is my mother's experience, and I can talk a lot about grief. sometimes, even though I had a beautiful experience with my mother, the grief was huge because I adored her. And the grief didn't show its ugly head big time until about 6 months after her death because I was so busy. And so, I had so many things to attend to, and then I had to get my event planning back running again, and Derby was there and all of that. So it was right after Derby that I actually felt my feelings and pretty much collapsed. So some of the things I've discovered about grief: you don't ever get over it. You learn to live with it, and you eventually learn to live with it in a way that it doesn't absorb your life. You actually just accept it as part of life. The most important thing, though, is that you allow yourself to feel it. Now, whether it's going to a group or a therapist, or as I did, I went up in the room and I decided to play a song on the guitar and sing that I had planned for my parents. And I didn't even get 2 chords in, and I just erupted in sadness. And I was down on the floor in a puddle of tears. And I felt like I was vomiting tears out of my body. And I likened it to when you're sick at your stomach and you've got something in there that needs to come out and be released. The more you try to hold it down, the worse you feel. I had such a relief of allowing that explosion, because I've come to find out that feelings need to be moved. They're like a river. When they move, then they move through you, and then you get back to life, and then they move through you, and then you get back to life. And so it's a flow. But if it gets clogged up, what happens to a river? It gets sick, it gets stagnant. It creates disease.
It eventually explodes.
And then it explodes, right? So then it comes out sideways. So the most important thing to do is to attend to it. So when I had that experience with my mother with the guitar, I had a beautiful picture. I always had an altar and a candle and so forth, because that helped me connect with her. When I finished letting myself just completely fall apart, all of a sudden, I was kind of laughing, and I felt empty, and I felt lighter. And all of a sudden I had all these ideas that I wanted to do about the work that I had been called to do. And so it completely shifted my energy. So I said, oh, that's a good practice to do that. The other thing and so I do that as often as I need to. And if you do it intentionally, like take intentional time to grieve, set up a picture, music, anything to evoke that emotion and call it forth and say, I want you to come up and I want to feel my pain for you. That's really, really powerful. The other thing that I really love doing is creating ritual and ceremony around it. And it's going to be different for every person. My mother and I love flowers. We love plants and flowers. And so that was something that we shared. And also cooking, like cooking something that they really love on a special occasion and eating it in their honor. That's a wonderful thing to do. So I found myself creating a little altar in the garden with a plant, and when I came to tend it, and I would put beautiful stones or whatever, that was my place to go and be with my mother and to feel my feelings and to honor her, and then to watch the rose bush blossom or the lily blossom. It was kind of like this feeling that you were in connection with the life of my mother, or I was in the life of my mother. So those are some of the things that I did. What else? Well, there's doing things in honor of someone. When my mother died, I had officiated a ceremony for her here, and then I did another one in Florida for the family and the rest and her friends. And I was at the beach a couple days later. It was at Thanksgiving, and I just felt so much sadness. And all of a sudden, I looked down the beach, and I saw this garbage on this beautiful beach, and I could hear my mother, that needs to be picked up. And so I spent 14 blocks from here to the pier picking up garbage off the beach in a bag in honor of my mother. It was beautiful. See, so it can be any direction. And what's so fabulous about that story is nobody noticed me. I was picking up I picked up everything real pristine, because she was German and she was very pristine and detailed. So I get to the end of that strip and I hear somebody yell to me, "Thank you." And I turned around. She said, "Thank you for doing it." And I turned around and went over to the blanket, and it was an older woman and her son, and she was German, and my mother was German. And you don't think I felt like my mother was there orchestrating that? And I was able to say to them, you know, my mother just passed away. I just did her memorial service, and here you are reminding me. And I want to remind you to not take a moment of this relationship for granted. You know, you being with your son and you having your mother here, you know. It was just a beautiful experience. So that's how I deal with grief. And the other thing is you got to stay aware of it. You know, you just can't do it one time and then get back into life. You got to do it over and over. You know, and how you notice is that you're irritable, you're frustrated, you're angry, you've got anger going on, or
Yes.
You're depressed. A good thing to do is check in and say, have I dealt with my grief? You know, and then set up.
Because people often want to skip those stages, especially the emotions that they're most uncomfortable with, which often is the anger. And when you try to skip that stage, you get stuck, and so then you're not able to move forward in that process of grieving. We see that over and over, and so much of the trauma work that we do has an element of grief, whether it's a relationship that's lost, a loved one that's lost, or you know, even a life transition. They need to grieve, you know, changing completely what they're doing in life, or, you know, there's so much about grieving that we don't do as a society.
We don't. I remember running into someone at the store 4 months after my mother died, and they said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just missing my mom so much." And the person said, "Still?" It was like, "You're still?"
Wow,
And I was like, "My God, I haven't even started," you know? And, and sometimes, you know, it shows up as a dullness in life. It's like not anything's wrong, but I'm just dull. I don't have much life. So you just have to pay attention. You feel it in your body. If you really become aware and start being present with your body tells you what needs to happen. And you and I both agree with this, you know, to get out and dance with, you know, no reserve, get out a drum, get out barefoot or naked, whatever your intention is. You know, move that energy, celebrate it, allow it, and birth it.
Yes.
And when you do that, you engage your you get it out of your mind, and you engage your entire body in the grieving process.
Yes.
And then you get to tap into your heart, because you get all of the body in it. So it hurts. There were times I didn't even think I could breathe. I missed my mother so much. And then I would be reminded what she went through during the war in Germany. And I said, and she lost her parents when she was a teenager in the war. I said, I'm going to, you know, I've not been in anything compared to what she has. And I knew how courageous she was. So I would just breathe in her courage and bring it into my body. You know, my mother could be that courageous. I can be that courageous. And, you know, to think of the qualities that you love in that person. I know a counselor one time asked me, "Well, what are you missing about your mother?" And I listed some qualities. And she said, "Well, you know how you cannot miss her so much? Be those qualities in your life. You start to express, you know, if my mother was exceptionally kind, then be kind. If she loved to do flowers, and begin to take some of those qualities and bring them into the living."
Beautiful. And it was your story that you shared with me about the passing of your friend recently, and how you did the death work with her and supported her through that, and midwifed her through that process of dying. And what I felt hearing that process, it was so beautiful. I could feel it. I could literally see it.
Right.
And what my thought was, is what a beautiful gift for a family going through this process to give their loved one, is if they're not able to do that themselves, they don't know how, or they just need support going through that, to have someone like you who is so knowledgeable and so experienced, because you've done this like many times for different people. So how that's the greatest gift that they can give their loved one and themselves, really. It's like to have someone like you come into that space and guide them through that process and help them navigate it. So how can they contact you, and what is it that you offer?
Well, that changes, it seems like every day it changes what I offer, you know, because life changes so much. What I'm offering right now is to set up consultations on the phone or by Zoom or FaceTime to do some consulting with me, or you know, let me guide them through. And how I work with clients in all of my work, in my wedding work or my event planning, I always met with people and it was on an individual basis. Let's just talk, see what's going on. Let me ask the questions and get the facts, and then find out what they desire and then what's keeping them from getting it. And then we just together, I suggest one thing or the other. You know, one family may not need some of the things that another family does. It's all very individual. I'm also going to eventually get a grief circle going online, which we can meet once a week, and a safe space for people to just come and be real with their feelings, and I can hold space for them and help guide them through that grieving process. Many times I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm inspired in the moment. I have so many resources. I've had so many experiences. And by the way, I have worked in almost every area of death in the last 16 years. I even worked in the funeral home business for a while. And so I know the pre-need, the at-need, the post-need hands-on, because I was executor, you know, POA, I was the, you know, trustee, I was all of it. And so I helped clean out the estate. And all of these pieces are so important to be able to manifest what you want. So people can get a hold of me. I think you attached a flyer.
Yeah, on the events I did, and I will also
and this is what it looks like in paper. So it's just when I usually do weddings for most of my income as an officiant, and I officiate life celebrations and funerals. And when all of that came to a screeching halt, and I was also teaching classes, I just went in and deeply said, well, what is it that's most needed that I have to give or to offer? And it was assisting people through this process while we're in this time of such uncertainty. And you know, navigating the systems is probably one of the most challenging part. And I know the systems really well. And of course it's new now because we've got newness in the systems, but you know, that's what I offered. And again, I just find out where people are and see what's needed, and everybody needs something different.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Diane.
Yes.
Thank you for being willing to have this conversation. And like you said, talking about it is the first step to opening up new possibilities and creating change. And this change is so desperately needed in this world, in our culture. So thank you for being that person.
Yes, well, my honor. I'm humbled by it, really. I'm honored, and I can't thank you enough. I love working with you, and I can't thank you enough for setting this up today. And we'll talk more, I'm sure. I do feel, people may know this about me, I feel a sense of urgency about this work because I know people are suffering. I also feel a sense of urgency because we need to uplift our, you know, we need to expand and to uplift for everybody's sake around this subject.
Yes.
So if I get pushy sometimes, that's why.
And that's perfect. It is so important. And for, you know, for anyone who feels like that you're being pushy, it's just that you are passionate about your message. And for anyone who might feel that that's pushy, there's going to be a few other people who are just like, please, I need more. Right.
And sometimes when a system's getting broken open, you have to push, and you know, you have to push against the walls to you know, to break open something new to happen. And not everybody has the willingness or even the know-how to, or the passion to do that. I know what's possible because I experienced it.
Yeah.
Now what I've been wanting to do is let other people know there are so many options that can make this whole process better in all ways, really. I've never worked with anybody that I didn't somehow uplift the circumstance, even if it was just one person that did something different in the family. You know, so it doesn't have to be full spectrum. It can just be one little piece, like not moving the body right away and spending time with it. That's a huge thing. If you do nothing else, that's a huge thing. And to have someone there supporting you that this is what happens and not to be afraid of it. So Ray, I imagine we're coming to the end of our time, right?
Yes,
So
we are.
thank you, my dear.
Thank you. And I will post your flyer in the comments on the Facebook Live. And with your permission, I would like to post this also in our Transforming Trauma group, because death is
that'd be awesome.
part of trauma.
Yes.
As well, and then in our online program around the trauma as well, so that it can be an ongoing thing that gets in front of people, and the right people will see.
Wonderful.
And feel, have a resource, a beautiful resource in you.
And start connecting all the points of light, and we will make a change. We will make it,
Yes, we will.
Things will change. Yeah.
Yes. And so right now I'd like to open it up, and we only have a few minutes left, but does anybody on here have any questions?
I just think you did a wonderful job interviewing, and it is validated by my own experience of 30 years of working with death and dying and with hospice, and so you're right on point. And so thank you.
Thanks, Bill, for being on.
Yes. Anybody else have any questions or comments before we end this beautiful conversation?
And I encourage you, if there's a question nagging and you're not saying it, message me. I'll be glad to talk to you about it. Yeah, I understand sometimes. I mean, as many times as I've been in front of people, being in the technology was a little shaky for me. And so I understand not wanting to speak out, but please, if there's something in there that you want to ask or to say or comment on, feel free to, reach out to me personally, and I will definitely respond to you.
Yes, and this goes for anybody listening to this conversation at any time, now or in the future.
Yes.
And thank you for that invitation, Diane.
My pleasure.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Take care.